In celebrating Heritage Day, President Cyril Ramaphosa has called on the nation to express pride in the Constitution, which continues to protect the cultures and heritage of South African citizens. The country's constitution has been lauded as the best in the world and has been held as a beacon of hope by many. President Ramaphosa delivered his speech virtually.
Celebrating South Africa's cultural diversity. In his annual Heritage Day celebration address, the country's first citizen has reminded South Africans that unity in our diversity is the most valuable feature of our common heritage.
We were confronted with the outbreak of terrible violence in some parts of our country. Property, infrastructure and businesses were destroyed. Jobs were lost and many people were injured and a number of them died. Our belief in ourselves as a united nation was shaken. We saw people destroying the very country we are trying to build. In the aftermath of the violence, we have had to ask ourselves, who are we as a people? What is it that defines our national character? What is it that defines our identity?
Ramaphosa has implored South Africans to reflect and find their national identity. This follows violent riots and massive looting and destruction in the country's main economic hubs, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, 2 months ago. The president has bemoaned the incidents, which he says have shaken our beliefs in a united nation.
I call on each and every one of us to express our pride in our Constitution. It has given rights to all of us that were once denied. It has given us opportunity where there once was none. It has given all of us freedom.
In a statement, the economic freedom fighters have reiterated the call for land through expropriation without compensation. The party says that there is no heritage without the land, whilst the National Freedom Party has called for social cohesion. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, to talk and reflect on Heritage Day, we're now joined via Zoom by PanAfricanist Professor Simphiwe Sesanti from the University of the Western Cape's Department of Language Education. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me and greetings to you, my brother, and to all the people in our country.
It's an interesting day when one talks about Heritage Day, and I have to say, when I look back at 1994 and now, the country's changed so much. A lot of the cultures have also evolved over time. I know that a lot of us like to think that we're still the same, but for sure, if you take a picture, 94, take a picture now, it is a different world in many respects. I guess that's what makes the challenge of a Heritage Day and trying to unpack it.
Different ways in many ways, but the same country in many ways as well. The fact that today, in fact 6 years ago, when the young people of this country demanded the removal of the Rhodes statue, they were saying that a statue is not a meaningless reflection or symbolism, but rather reflects a victory of a certain people and a defeat of another, a celebration of certain values and a denigration of another. So they were basically saying to us that after so many years of what we refer to as freedom, those who dispossessed the African people continue to display symbols of their victory and symbols of the humiliation of the African people. And we continue to see in this land, great levels of poverty and increasing ones at that in this country. And poverty, has got a very distinct and clear color, and that is the color of blackness. And so, when they say that the more things change, the more they remain the same, or the West they are becoming. So yes, if then, Mr. Ndoro, you are referring to evolution, it can be understood in many different ways. There are, of course, those of us who have been in many respects, and I put emphasis on the word assimilation as opposed to the word integration. And the great Bantu Biko distinguished between the two and said that if by integration you mean, some people coming together and recognizing one another's value, then yes, I am for integration. But if by assimilation, and I'm paraphrasing Biko, you think that black people are going to join and be accommodated in a world that is determined by the standards of white people, then I'm absolutely, against that. And so Biko distinguished between integration and assimilation. And what we have to a very great extent in this country is an assimilation where Eurocentric values continue to hold sway, and the African people are joining a table that has already been laid and conducted in a particular fashion. And so we continue being guests, at a table where we should be hosts, or as Bantu Biko would say, that we continue to be spectators in a game that we should be playing. And the rules of the game are determined by those who have been, determining the rules all along. And it is for this reason that to this very day you see children who are coming from rural areas, from the townships, going to historically white schools because, little or nothing. In fact, things have worsened in the black townships. And you see, therefore, our children going to these schools and adopting or Eurocentric values being imposed upon them. And you realize that the more things change, the more they remain the same, or the worse they become.
The President asked an interesting question today. He said, let us reflect on who we are as a people. What is our identity? 1994, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu came up with this phrase, the Rainbow Nation. Madiba then really kind of gave it more strength. And for a time, that's how we identified ourselves. Where are we now in terms of this potpourri of different heritages, different backgrounds, trying to come together under the South African flag?
It reminds me of two phrases that were used, with reference to Madiba. And Madiba was said to be having a Madiba magic. And later we had his successor, who was then referred to as the Mbeki logic. And so we had a magic and then we had a logic on the other hand. And we know that Thabo Mbeki, began to raise issues about the existence of two nations in South Africa, one rich and that is white, and one that is black and that is poor. And so when Mbeki was beginning to raise these very important issues, it was said that Mbeki was re-racializing South Africa because, those who had been in a comfortable position, and in fact, through the magic, black people, as always, even in your country, you would recall, Mr. Ndoro, that in Zimbabwe in 1980, Mugabe was pushing a racial reconciliation. And what appeared and became very clear was that really the people who were reconciling were black people of Zimbabwe, and those who had been oppressing the Zimbabweans for a very long time continued to be arrogant. And so we have had that kind of a situation as well in this country. And so when these issues are raised then, by those who continue to be on the receiving end, it was said that one was pursuing a magic, of course, that, those who had been having privilege for all along were comfortable with, and the one who was raising questions that were pertinent and saying that these issues cannot be deferred any longer, they needed to be confronted on, and he was raising this logic, and he was accused of re-racializing the politics of South Africa.
Do you think that we've done or made any progress in terms of trying to move away from the apartheid era categorization of people where you had Africans, coloureds, Indians and whites? Or do we still live by that in terms of our South Africanness?
No, there is no doubt about that. People continue to be categorized in those fashions when people are frank with themselves. It is only, when we are diplomatic that we project an image of being one South African United Nation. But our living conditions speak volumes more than what we pronounce. When we see, we hear that, there are certain children who drown in certain areas and who fall in particular holes or who fall in pit holes of toilets. And those children who are on that receiving end are African children, are black children. And so it is not a question, of being abstract about this, but rather being very concrete. And the realities speak to and confront us in our faces, unless, of course, we want to pretend otherwise, and of course, are being insensitive to these realities.
How do you think urbanization and the coming together of the different black cultures in the urban centers has impacted our heritage? Has it changed it slightly? So we're taking out external influences like the West and all of that, but just the fact that, I might have come from Limpopo, I now live in Soweto, I might have come from KZN and I live in Soweto, and there's a culture that comes with this mingling and coming together in an urban setting. How's that changed our different heritages?
It has changed it in many ways, both in the positive and the other in the negative. The positive aspect would be that the more those who come from different cultural backgrounds begin to share what they have, and that is appreciated by those who come from those and beginning to learn about one another. But also at the same time, the other reality is that those who think that their particular cultures are superior to the others carry that kind of superior attitude and despise those that they think are coming from a lesser culture. And the expectation, of course, is that there's going to be, an exercise of assimilation as opposed to that of integration. So those kinds of factors are both at play.
So we wake up on a day like today. How should we be embracing Heritage Day? When I think about it, I often wonder, is this something we should be dedicating a day to, or it should just be a reflection of what we do every single day?
That's a beautiful one. I fully agree with you that a particular day should be a reflection on what is being done every day, not simply dedicating, a day and when that is past, we forget. But in direct, response to your question, one of the questions that have been asked for a very long time and answered in a very convenient way has been, who is an African? And so in that sense, when it suits many, people regard themselves as Africans. When it doesn't suit them, they don't regard themselves as Africans. I think that the major question that should be posed for all of us is, what is African? Because when we begin to answer that question, we are going to be addressing a question of values. And so if then you ask me what is African, I'm going to be saying we need to be referring to an indigenous African philosophical perspective. And of course, again, Bantu Biko being my point of departure, and that being that in a continent whose majority are the indigenous African people, it is a given that their culture should be one that is, a predominant culture and determine the trajectory in the society in which we live in. And if then we agree on that point, then we are going to interrogate the values that, refer to Ubuntu, one concept that has been bent this way and that way opportunistically. But Ubuntu is not merely merely, though the foundation is kindness, but Ubuntu is about justice. It is for something and it stands against something. It is for in one of the values of the African people that have kept them going and that have been, set aside, is that the land can neither be sold nor be bought. It is a sacred property of the ancestors that should be given freely to everyone, not be sold. Because if you sell and buy the land, it means that those who are rich are going to buy the entire society and continue to exploit those who are poor and powerless. And therefore then, if that's the case, we're also going to do away with individualism. And so we will then say that, Ubuntu does not merely speak, it speaks to all issues, whether they are political, social, and economic, and that it is not enough, and it has happened throughout the African continent, that it is thought that African people deserve to simply vote and vote and vote until they turn purple, that, we've got to address the injustices of the past and say that if a people has been dispossessed, we need to address the question of the repossession of the land, we need to address the redistribution so that, the poor and the rich, we are going to be able to do away with those kind of distinctions that are, staring us in the face. And so, therefore, it is our heritage is not merely about singing songs, about dancing, about putting on certain dress codes. Our heritage, the philosophy of our ancestors, is about the issues of justice, the issues of being pro-poor, the issues of redressing historical injustices. If we do anything else, we are busy with, cosmetic arrangements and token arrangements. And if then that happens, we may think that for some time we are going to delay. But, the one lesson that has taught us many things, however, it has been addressed, but Zimbabwe, it was never thought that after so many years, when the land question in Zimbabwe was not addressed, the people who turn out the way that they did, things may have gone horribly wrong, but whatever direction things may have taken, the question of the land in Zimbabwe was a legitimate issue. The question of the land throughout the African continent remains a legitimate issue. And when we speak about the land, we're not merely speaking about plots and gardens. We are speaking about the mineral resources of the entire country that have got to be put at the disposal. And any leader worth her or his salt has got to be justice conscious, and that has got to be addressed. Then that we speak meaningfully about the heritage and what it means to be African, not merely who is an African, because anyone and everyone can claim to be an African when it suits them. But when we begin to interrogate the question of what it is to be African, then not anyone and everyone can claim to be articulating, the true picture and philosophical perspective of our ancestors.
And you've raised an interesting question, again, that's debated often. So often when we say African in South Africa, we actually mean black. But actually, when we start to expand it a little bit more, an African should be a person from the continent. And when you break down the colonial borders and you travel a little bit up and down the continent, you start to see the threads that join all of us together. So when we talk about heritage, how far do we go back? Because I think sometimes we get stuck in the post-colonial era and the maps that were drawn then. And yet perhaps we should go back even further and realize our identities are Pan-African.
Absolutely. When we say Pan-African, we are making reference to the entire African continent, because the truth of the matter is that the African people have got a common source of origin, and they spread out throughout the entire African continent. And of course, there were those that were forcibly dispersed and were taken to other places against their will. And so when we refer then to the African people, we are referring to those who are the indigenous of this African continent and those that have been forcibly relocated. And so then also that then speaks to the issues when some of us are referring to others as foreigners. And in this country, we speak about foreigners foreign nationals. And you begin to wonder, how then do you refer to an African as a foreigner, and for that matter, a foreign national in the African continent? So what this means also on this particular day, we need to be reflecting deeply about Pan-African consciousness. And I heard your question earlier on when you were saying that, Africans refer to those that are on the continent. Not everyone in this continent identifies her or himself as an African. And some, one of our thinkers said that there are many who come from outside the African continent who do not love the African people, who do not even love Africa, but they are interested in Africa for what they can benefit from it and how they can exploit African people. And therefore it would be unjust, when someone usurps the African identity and claims to be an African, and yet that very same person violates African people and violates African philosophy and culture. So I therefore, Mr. Ndoro, would be very frank with you and say that the term or the identity of Africa is not up for sale and it is not for free.
Professor Sesanti, this is a conversation I'd love to have with you more frequently and for longer. Unfortunately, we've run out of time today, but we'll certainly get you back in studio again to talk more on this important issue. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Asante sana.
Karibu ndugu. Maitabas.
Tatenda. That's Professor Sesanti there speaking to us about Heritage Day and what it means on a day like this on a continent such as ours.